Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 661st New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Ryndon Johnson and Ksenia M. Soboleva. We're thrilled that Ryn will close today's program with a poetry reading. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for actual necessary decolonial work, but a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land that we are speaking from. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest and host. Artist and poet Rindon Johnson bases his work in language. Johnson has presented solo exhibitions at Chisenhale Gallery in London, the Julia Stoschek Collection in Düsseldorf, and the SculptureCenter in Long Island City. Johnson has participated in group exhibitions internationally and is the author of Nobody Sleeps Better Than White People, the VR book Meet in the Corner, Shade the King, and The Law of Large Numbers, Black Sonic Abyss. And our host today, New York-based writer and art historian Ksenia M. Soboleva specializes in queer art and culture. She holds a PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU with a dissertation titled Fragments, Art, AIDS, and Lesbian Identity in the United States. Her writings have appeared in the Brooklyn Rail as well as other publications. She is currently the Andrew W. Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in Gender and LGBTQ+ History at the New York Historical Society and an adjunct professor of art history at NYU. And with that, it's my pleasure to pass it over to you, Ksenia.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you to everyone in the Brooklyn Rail for making this possible. It's always a pleasure. Hi, Ryn. Thank you for joining me today. It's so lovely to be in conversation with you. I think we haven't seen each other in person for I think 7 years. So it's lovely to see you virtually. Congratulations on the exhibition. So the title of your exhibition, Cuvier, references the Cuvier beaked whale, and it is, I think, sort of your homage to this whale. And I'm very curious where your fascination for this whale began. And also I have to tell you, I mean, we don't have to talk about this right now, but I have one recurring dream in my life, and I have it every 6 months to a year or so, and it's about a whale, and it's my one recurring dream.
I want to talk about that right now. Okay. Let's start again.
You go first.
Cuvier, the whale showed up because, so I had to make all this work for the Whitney, and I was like, I'm going to sequester myself in Los Angeles and make some work because it's really easy for me to age leather works in LA because the speed that I can work at is really fast. And I knew I didn't want to work with any mold, so I needed the dry heat. And I suddenly found myself contending with painting, like really sitting in my studio alone with my work for the first time in since graduate school, which I know sounds absurd, like I'm supposed to be, that's what I do apparently, or one of the things that I do, but it was just it was a really intense moment. And so my friend was like, Ryn, why don't you listen to some audiobooks? Like, why don't you chill out a little bit? And one of the books that I found was called Fathoms, like World and the Whale. And it's by this amazing Australian author. And she kind of drew all these connections between the whaling industry and that sort of the industrialization of whale bodies and our industrialization of many different types of bodies in the present day, and kind of how the whaling industry became our backbone to understand how to exploit many bodies and also to make certain types of chemicals, to depend on oil and other different types of products. And I kind of was just like immediately like, whoa, this is way deeper than I expected. And then of course I, started to remember my own childhood being obsessed with whales. I have some family in Hawaii, so I spent a lot of time whale watching. And so that kind of pushed me to kind of go that way. And then I read this other book, listened to this other book called War of the Whales. And it was about this mass stranding in the early 2000s of the Cuvier's beach whale. And there was one part where they're describing the rarity of this whale, and they're like, the main researcher who knows basically everything about the Cuvier's beak whale, he didn't see one for 10 years, like in the entire process of researching them. And I was like, that is fantastic. Like, how could there be such a mysterious creature? And so, of course, I then Google image searched it, and there's this photo of the Cuvier beach whale like jumping out of the water, and it looks so amazing. It's like I don't want to sound gross, but it was so hot. Like, it was just like one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen.
Really cute. I encourage everyone to Google them right now.
They're really good looking. And then I saw their bodies, their backs, which have these like celestial, almost like constellations on them, as though it was a line drawing that my daughter and I do together. And I just was like, this is it. I'm hooked. I'm in. And I then became totally obsessed with it.
Okay, now I have to tell you my dream.
Yes,
because
please.
it literally has to do with whales and constellations. Also, let's pull up images of the exhibition so we can look at it as we talk. So in this, and it's really, I never know whether to refer to it as a nightmare or a dream. And I think that we need a term. This is where, again, language fails us, right? We need a term for something that's between a nightmare and a dream, because basically in this dream, I wake up and I realize that I'm floating in an ocean and it's nighttime. And I have an immense fascination for ocean and like deep waters, but I'm also extremely scared of it, because I get scared when I can't see what's underneath me. And like, I respect the ocean. And so I wake up and I realize that I'm floating in this ocean and it's nighttime, and I get really panicked. And there's nothing around me. And then I look up and I see this beautiful constellation of stars. And I have this moment of being in absolute awe with life, and my fear disappears completely. And it's this like really interesting switch from being utterly afraid to being just overwhelmed with joy. And then from afar, I hear the sound. Ooh. And then in front of me emerges this thing out of the water. But the thing is abstract, but I know it's a whale, but it's abstract. And then I wake up.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's
every 6 months to a year, recurring dream. Only one.
Wow. That's congratulations on an awesome recurring dream.
So yeah, that's so amazing that you mentioned the constellation aspect of it as well. So here are some images of the exhibition.
Yeah.
And there's some stained glass pieces, and then there's a cow leather and bleach painting, and then there's also a video game. And maybe perhaps we can talk about the stained glass ones first. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is this the first time that your stained glass pieces are standalone or standing on themselves?
Yeah, actually it is. I've been sketching them that way for years now, but it's the first kind of opportunity that I've had for it. Mm-hmm. It definitely is also a contention with sculpture with a capital S, which also kind of fascinated me and something I haven't, dealt with in a little while. Mm-hmm. On each of their kind of shapes with these two works in particular are based on sort of, deeply American things. The one in the window is made from reproduction Tiffany glass, and it's meant to be like a giant fireplace screen, like blown up. And it takes its composition, actually, oddly enough, from Duchamp's Nude Descending the Staircase. Mm-hmm. And so it has both, like, it's still the color palette and the composition. It's part of this whole trip that I'm on these days about compositional reparations, which is that, like, compositions are one of the hardest things to do. Like, I think composition is the thing that everybody's sort of rooting around and looking for the right composition. And then how you clad it is kind of like whatever, however you clad it, a good composition will hold your viewer quite closely. And so of course I'm like, well, I'm going to take the compositions, like, because for many reasons, I don't always have time to come up with a new one. And so this piece is, I think it's my second stained glass compositional reparation. The other one was actually the stained glass work that I showed in Kiev, which was Guernica, as 3 panels across stained glass and like 5 different types of stained glass. So I don't know, it's kind of another sort of conceit. And then the freestanding work that kind of looks like a chalkboard, the sort of blue and white piece, that one is based off of Philip Johnson in the Glass House has a 18th century painting that he has sort of mounted in this stand. And this is the exact sort of size and shape of that stand, except with this stained glass work inside of it. I think in that case, it wasn't necessarily composition, but it was sort of like shape based, like where I was like, okay, I know this shape works. I saw it and I felt stunned by it. And so I want to sort of play around with it and follow through with it. And also I wanted to know if I made it that way, would it disappear if you stood like in front of it on one side? Would it kind of like become a different shape or a line or something like this?
And the Duchampion one, it also evokes like a medieval triptych. Is that something you were thinking of as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we had a critique for the show actually the other day. And there was a moment right before where someone was like, yeah, I wonder what your take is on religion and sort of what that headspace is, kind of how you might display information as a temporal conceit to kind of try and tell a story. And this is kind of not doing that, but it still holds the same composition. I don't have a good answer about it. It's on my mind because I like them, but I don't really know what it means to start dancing around with this. I'm nervous, trepidatious about some of my reference.
But you've spoken about how you have had this longstanding fascination with art history, right? And were you always aware of its exclusionary nature, or was there a certain point in which those sort of power structures inherent in art history became more apparent to you? I love this idea of reparation and reclaiming these canonical compositions.
I think it must have been, like, I think when I started to get kind of itchy about all of it, I remember I was in Miami for Art Basel and I was like 21. My mom's my mom's an art dealer, so I have been to a lot of art fairs and spent a lot of time in art fairs and around the art market in that way. And obviously being 21, I also was like partying and stuff. And I was like, I think I was like very hungover and I was like looking at this Jackson Pollock piece that was like kind of small. And I was like, all these people were moving around me. And I just was like, no, like, I don't know. I started to feel, I like really felt the kind of frustrations of not just the like economic value of the thing, but also like, why is this thing so like important / amazing / I hate it / all of this stuff came together. And I was actually, this is quite violent. And it really kind of sent me on this, I don't know, this path of really looking deeper at how frustrating it is to love something so much that is so harmful in the same breath.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a similar experience at the Armory this year. I went being in such a good mood and I left being so just frustrated and grumpy. But then all the colleagues that I ran into, like other art historians, had the same experience, particularly this year. And I don't know what about this year really triggered it. But yes, I mean, art fairs in general.
I had like a similar sensation going to Costco for the first time since being really young, like standing in the meat department at Costco. I felt the same sort of like sensation where it was almost too much to take or something.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that. And when did you first start working with stained glass?
I first started working with stained glass for my SculptureCenter show. Which,
so that was 21?
Yeah, that was 21, but we have been like, I had been designing and drawing that piece since March of 2020, basically. So yeah, and then really deep dialogue with the glassmaker a man named Michael Davis, who actually learned how to make glass in the same town where my younger sibling was born and where I grew up, and who is like just a master. And he taught me a lot about sort of what glass is capable of. And that relationship has been super impactful on my whole practice. Yeah.
Can we look at the cow leather work next? Yeah. So you referred to these works as paintings, right?
Yeah, but very colloquially.
And I'm hoping that everyone saw your installation at the Whitney as well. Perhaps we can just briefly look at that slide as well, just so people have a reference. Yeah. And you made these in LA?
I did, yeah.
And they went through these indigo baths, and then you laid them out in the sun for months. And so it's centered around this chance-based process where you expose them to the elements. But what I actually didn't realize until recently is that these are only 4 of a total of 8 that you made. Which, I have an obsession with fragments. So when I realized that, I was like, oh my God, I love them even more now. So these were before the work that's at the Cuvier show. Okay, so let's talk about these first.
They were happening all together.
Okay, they were happening all together.
They all kind of happened at once, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something?
I don't know. These works are, when you do something and you're like, I think this is a good idea, and then later you're like, was that a good idea? But it's still okay. Yeah. These works are very decidedly a set of 8. And I kind of was hoping that they could never be joined together, that it's kind of important that they stay sort of always apart from one another. And so my gallery was kind of just like, but wait, there are 8 works, so you expect someone to buy all 8 of them? And I was like, no, I expect someone to buy one. I expect people to sort of have these things that are connected that they might never connect again. I don't know. Was that a good idea? Maybe.
I think it's a great idea. This obsession with a whole and having like a whole series of things. I mean, we can start talking about art fairs again, but
here we are again.
Want the conversation to go there. But I mean, I love these. And you have an ongoing interest in abstraction, right? And so it's funny because we had a whole conversation about abstraction versus figuration in the last social environment that I did. And I'm really interested in this conversation of whether abstraction is a better vehicle to represent a body beyond gender and perhaps also beyond race, right? Because you've also said that you're hesitant to ever represent a Black body figuratively, since that taps into, selling a body. But then it's recently, every time I talk about this, I'm reminded that, this dichotomy between abstraction and figuration is perhaps equally flawed as the dichotomy between male and female. And, other things, other binaries. So I would love to hear your thoughts about abstraction and figuration and all that.
Yeah, I still kind of stand by my initial headspace that I don't know if I'll ever be able to comfortably figure a Black body in any of my work. And I think that's just a confusion about sort of what Blackness is. And I think that also becomes a very slippery thing. This back and forth between figuration and abstraction is getting bigger and bigger and more confusing for me as time is going on, mostly because I think my entire practice is starting to shape up to be very hard to pin down. And so as my fascination with abstraction continues, it's kind of just where am I going with this? It's almost like I drifted towards abstraction also in this kind of question of well, this has apparently been credited as an American-y thing. You know what I mean? As an American impulse to go abstract. And I was like, that's weird. Why is that? And also asking questions about that stuff. I don't understand that either. But I really love this line between this question that like any binary or conversation that seeks to create a binary is like a replication of the violences that create the same gender binary, which then creates all of this unnecessary trouble, I think. And this kind of unnecessary trouble has been on my mind a lot because I have this, like, I have a kid, she's like 4.5. And because I'm trans, she actually is this like odd test case for someone who like doesn't necessarily understand gender in relation to someone's like biological bits or the like middle parts, as they say at her school. And I kind of didn't really understand the gravity of that oddness for her until coming back to an American context, because we had been existing and continue to exist in a German context where we're kind of bilingual or something. So we're kind of, because she's speaking German and English, and because German's gender basis flips in the past, she just doesn't understand what the point is in a lot of ways. And it also then makes me be like, well, yeah, what is the point? But then I'm like, really realistically, what does that mean for her as she's going forward? Because we're kind of equipping her with a base that is accepted in these very queer spaces where she's been raised and where all her friends are and where we live. But eventually, who knows what will happen to her and where she will go, and how will she translate being from this kind of island of queerness? And I don't know. It's confusing to me. So in some ways, I wonder too about the usefulness of binaries, because like we kind of were thinking, well, we're not gonna do a non-binary childhood for her. We're not gonna say they, them, or her pronouns or anything like this. We'll just kind of be like, listen, this is what the people think you are. If you want to be that, that's cool. Do your thing. And now it's kind of like, okay, well, that sort of is like binaries are useful in that way, kind of keep us moving. Like, and so in some ways it's like, is abstraction and figuration, is the difference between those two things useful simply to keep us moving? And I don't know, maybe it's kind of nice. Like, I kind of like sitting in the abstract camp simply because I'm just trying to get through the sentence. If that makes sense. Like,
yeah, and especially what you mentioned, binaries in relation to language and, pronouns. Language is so slippery, and you've spoken a lot about your interest in the failure of language. And actually, as I was on the plane to Amsterdam, where I am now, I was thinking about your work, and I remembered this essay by Peggy Phelan that I absolutely love. And interestingly, it's titled "To Suffer a Sea Change." Do you know this essay?
No, amazing.
So she writes about, and I just looked it up before I logged on because I wanted to read you the first part. It's this essay that she wrote after having eye surgery. And it's very poetic, which is rare for art historians. But she offers this really interesting analysis on the connection between sight and speech and vision and words, and in particular the ways in which the body experiences those when it's in pain. And so I looked up and I wrote down the first paragraph, and she writes, "Words walk to the threshold, but will not enter the rooms of the body where pain runs wild. Deserted by words, pain lacks temporal sequence or spatial order. It makes a sound that syntax cannot carry. Memory cannot store pain neatly away. Anticipation cannot predict its shape. To be in pain is to feel the insubstantial, hollow weight of words, and to want them desperately anyway. It is to live outside the grounds of one's own body." Isn't that beautiful?
That's beautiful.
And I read that and I think about your work.
Oh, thanks. It's
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's interesting that you say that. We listen to a lot of like why podcasts to like give ourselves a break from answering a lot of why questions. And there was one about pain, and they said that sometimes we make noise when we have pain, and it literally interrupts our brain's ability to send the signal of pain, that like the sound itself stops the pain. And so sometimes we yell in order to like get the pain, to like move the pain elsewhere, to like move it outward or around. And I guess this idea of naming kind of circles into that too. It's like when you name it, you say it, you speak it, it interrupts it, which is kind of interesting.
It is. Wow. I should listen to more podcasts. I always want to be the podcast person. And then I just, when I have half an hour, I just sit in silence and stare at the wall. And I always think to myself, I could be listening to a podcast and learn about why the grass is green. And I don't.
Here's the thing though, the wall knows stuff. There's stuff to know on the wall.
That will be the quote of this social environment. The wall knows stuff. I love that. Let's go back to the cowhide. I forgot about it. So you made this at the same time as the Whitney pieces, also in LA. So where does this sit in that series of works?
So like a lot of, it's like I jump around a lot because the convergence of the whale was so manifold. So it's like, it's not just the fact that I'm obsessed with them and there's this crazy history of exploitation, et cetera, but also the fact that cows and whales have a common ancestor. And I found that kind of interesting.
Wait, what?
Yeah, they have a common ancestor. They're like the same thing. Isn't that cool?
I didn't know that. That's why I love cows. I always knew I love whales, and I have my reasons, but I also love cows, and that was never really, though as a kid I would herd cows. Actually, maybe it does make sense.
I think that's relevant.
Yeah.
I think that's really relevant.
I had no idea. Okay, I'm sorry, continue.
No, I mean,
I'll write this down. Cows, whales, same ancestor.
It's something I've known since I was really little, actually, and it's always been like a fun fact I pull out. There's a whaling museum in Lahaina on Maui, and it's incredible. Nobody's ever in it, and I every year as a kid would make my family go to this whaling museum. But one of the coolest pieces of that museum is watching the evolution from cow ancestor to whale, and dog ancestor to like bottlenose dolphin, et cetera, like toothed whale, et cetera. And so this idea that cows and dogs have become whales and dolphins, it's just like wild to think about. And also one of the ways that you can kind of see their intersection is through their sight and through the way that they see, or like kind of don't see, because they don't need to see anymore, but they still see in the same cow-like panorama of like 270 degrees or something absurd like that. It's really fascinating. Anyways, yeah, so I guess like I was riffing, in order to make the bigger works for the Whitney, I was just like riffing on a lot of different cows, like a lot of different skins. And this is one of those riffs. And sometimes when I do that, it's kind of like, there's a lot of sacrifices that happen, failures and mistakes. And this is one of the ones where my assistant Sophronia was like, dude, this is you keep this, please don't throw this away. Because I kind of get in these classic artist spells where I'm like, throw everything out, like get rid of it, I'm done. I hate this. Why am I here? I'm going into real estate, goodbye. Like that, that kind of thing. And this was saved from the pile.
Wow.
And I'm glad.
What made you change your mind?
No, Sophronia just isolated it. Literally, I didn't change my mind. Sophronia was just like, I saved it and I stretched it. And I was like, oh, okay. So it was saved in that way.
Yeah.
I had changed my mind after I saw it stretched. I was like, oh, it's terrifying and kind of cool, which felt good.
You mentioned exploitation, and you've said that in many ways your practice arises from your interest in byproducts and which is inherently autobiographical to you. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, when I was in school and I started really working with the cows, I had been on this sort of epic spiral to find a Black thing. And I felt like, okay, I'm a byproduct. That feels right. Like my existence is a byproduct of so many convergences of things. And I don't know, when we think about the idea of capital accumulation, I wanted to understand what things kind of fall through the cracks. Like everything is exploited in like a capitalist system, right? But a byproduct is kind of this thing that like it's exploited simply because everything needs to be exploited. And so in some ways it's like nobody was really aiming for this, but we got it anyway. And what's odd about leather being a byproduct now is that it had so much value. It was so useful for millennia. And so it's so odd that a skin suddenly becomes useless when actually a skin is like useful. And I guess it was just like, what is this? Like, what is this misunderstanding or something? Mm-hmm. And then of course there's like questions I have too about like when something becomes a byproduct, it can kind of be, fugitive feels like the wrong word. It feels buzzy, like a kind of buzzy art word from like 2018 or 19, but that's kind of what it is. Like it's kind of, it kind of is on the run from being pinned down, because it's always slipping around. It's like, oh, it's a byproduct of that, it's a byproduct of this. And it's kind of like, oh, you can't really name it then. You can just kind of say it's the result of when these things converge or when this happens. And often with leather, it's the byproduct of desperation on the part of the farmer and like them the need to process the skin. And I kind of think that that's interesting, sort of this, I don't know, that's an odd way to come into being.
And there has been this increasing interest over the past decade in particular in these parallels between queer identity and animal identity, right? And Jack Halberstam's recent publication, Wild Things, is an example. And, you could go as far back as Derrida, The Beast and the Sovereign, where he says that, there are two groups that fall outside of society. The sovereign stands above it and the beast falls below it. And so queer people, have that sort of marginalization. As falling below society. Or Aristotle said that the only thing that differentiates the human and the animal is the human ability to speech, which then, when you also look at it from like a ableist perspective, really complicates it.
And also, like, we know too now, of course, that the whales are speaking in this incredible way. One of the things actually in this book, Fathoms, that she talks about is whale scientists who had been working since the 70s kind of realizing that whale culture is like significantly gone downhill. That like, because of like the continuation of whaling, a lot of the older whales who knew way more complex songs, their songs ended up like kind of disappearing from the oceans. So we can hear them on the recordings from the 70s, but we don't hear them now in the modern ocean. We like literally can't find any more examples of this type of whale culture sonically, which is absolutely fascinating.
Wow.
They've disappeared or something, like a particular language has disappeared.
That is devastating.
Yeah.
Okay, that made me sad. Ryn, you are also a poet. In fact, I first came to know your work through your poetry, and I'm curious to hear how you navigate that relationship between your practice as a poet and as a visual artist, and where do they connect and where do they differ, and also how does your practice as a poet manifest itself in this show? And I guess the first answer is perhaps the titles. They're always very poetic.
Thanks. These are some of the shortest titles I've ever done, actually. Which is,
I actually noticed.
And I don't know what that means, but something that we have only talked a little bit about, I guess, in the kind of like publicity of the show is that there's a book coming out in relation to the show from my gallery, Francois Gabalian from Inpatient Press, and it's basically all of my titles in their kind of truer form as poems, which is sort of how they kind of start in my brain, which is the same way that all poems start, is kind of slipping around in my mind, something I've heard or something that's like kind of moving. And so, yeah, so this book is meant to come out on the day the show closes on the 15th of October. And I didn't realize how much writing I'd been doing over like the last 6 or 7 years. And it really, I think in a lot of ways, I don't think of them as too separate, if that makes sense. Like they're kind of, they need each other to survive. I think the poems, if they're strong enough as titles, they should create a space in your brain that's another place that then makes like a third work, like the brain work, if that makes sense, the kind of memory work. And that memory work is the work that a viewer should hold on to, like the thing that like the kind of themselves in relation to the work is the work, because that's what ultimately will kind of stick around 9 times out of 10.
That's interesting, because I once made an argument. I mean, it was silly. I was trying. It was more about like trying to convincingly argue a point than necessarily 100% like standing behind it. But that performance shouldn't be documented or archived, because the viewer is the one archiving it in a way. So the memory, yeah.
I honestly love that. I think I had a similar realization, like smoking weed in graduate school, being like, whoa, some of the best art is just rumors. Is
Yeah.
like just like a really good story you heard about a piece.
It's true. I wanted to write a book also on rumor and gossip in relation to art. I have a lot of ideas that never, materialize, but
there is something to be said about it. I don't know. Rumor, gossip, exclusivity, they're all kind of swinging around together. Yeah.
Yeah. But I love what you said about realizing you've been more productive than you realized. I love when that happens.
Say, it feels good.
Yeah. So the book is coming out October 15th.
October 15th, yes.
And will there be a reading?
Oh yeah, oh yes, certainly. Yeah, it should be really fun. I mean, I don't read so much anymore these days with the kid and the traveling and just I'm getting old, I'm slowing down. And so yeah, it's a thing.
And you're primarily based in Berlin.
Yeah, I'm usually based in Berlin, and we're kind of in this like very much a between space at the moment, because I just, as I was telling you before we started, I just got some land to begin the cow plan, which is to have a cow from birth to death. Cows should live for 30 years, and I was like doing the math. If I'm 32, that means that I really need to buy a cow now, because it's very possible I could die before the cow dies, and that can't happen. Because then afterwards, I want to brain tan the hides and use the whole body of the cow. The hope would be that a collector would purchase the cow's life and then basically pay for this cow to live. And the whole thing, the documentation of it being alive and its eventual death, and then the eating and consumption of the cow and all the products made from the cow, is the work that the collector then receives. So it's kind of like a long-term thing.
That's amazing. Do you have a name for the cow? Would you name the cow?
Oh yeah, well the collector would name the cow.
Oh, the collector would name the cow.
It's their cow.
Is there a cow? And it would just be one cow?
No, there should be lots of them. I think it's kind of mean to have just one cow.
So you would purchase several cows?
Yes, many cows.
So what, in 2 years at the Armory, we will be seeing cows?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could put them in a van and bring them to the Armory.
Who's the artist that did the horses in the 70s? Janice Cornelis? Does anyone know what I'm talking about? The stalls with the horses?
No.
I think it was part of Arte Povera.
What? Really? Cool.
Yes. I think this is, I have a real talent for mispronouncing things. I think it's this, something like this. Anyway.
Cool.
So there is also a video game component of this show, and it is not VR, but you work in VR. I have to admit to you right now, VR really confuses me. I don't understand it, and I tend to just say that I dislike it because I don't even want to deal with it. Maybe not to admit my own ignorance of how it actually works, or I don't know. I went to the VR Tribeca Film Festival section this year, and I ended up just absolutely having to escape. And the person I was with stayed for 4 hours, and I just had to flee.
That's quite bad for their eyes, 4 hours in VR.
Yeah, well, they were a little okay. That's a different story, but so tell us about this video game.
Okay, so this is, speaking of whales, I am I have this kind of, not like side practice, but like deep, terrifying interest in speculative animation. It was a part of my show that was at SculptureCenter in Chisenhale in 2021. And I kind of then was interested in like, okay, if I have data on something, that means I can make anything. And now we're at a point with computers that you can basically, with any sort of data and the right points, you can remake any moment in time, and it's quite believable. And I was realizing in my sort of southern obsession again with whales that nobody had bothered to make any simulation of what it might look like to see as a whale. And so immediately I just was like, I need to see this. It became this kind of like almost terrifying desire to see as the whale sees. We know they see in black and white because they only have 2 rods and 2 cones. And we know that they have this long panorama because of this vestigial sight that they have from cows. And so I kind of knew that it would be insane, but I didn't really realize that it would actually be possible. And so of course I approached Pariah Interactive, who I make games and like all my VR work with. And they were like, dude, of course we can make you a whale filter. No problem, do it right now. And so, like a few days later, I get this email and I can see as the whale sees. And so then of course I'm like, okay, well, what's it like to be inside the Great Bahama Canyon, which is the same canyon we were kind of talking about earlier, where the Cuvier's beaked whales were hunting and then they got thrown off by the sonar and then they had this like massive beaching. I wanted to know what it was like inside of that canyon. And so we realized almost immediately after we created the canyon itself, that these whales, even though they're like 15 feet long, inside of the canyon, they're absurdly tiny, just like laughably small. And so we were very kind of mystified about how to deal with kind of the amount of space inside of the deep ocean and mapping and navigating that as like sort of now fake whales. And it was definitely a big challenge to figure out like, okay, how do we move through this, et cetera. And then of course, we realized like, oh, well, whales don't see, they use echolocation. And so that's when I reached out to Jackie Gork, who is this like wonderful sound artist. And they were very like, okay, wow, like sonically, this is a really interesting series of questions because we as humans can't really fathom the way that whales hear. Like they have so much fat on their bodies and so much, so many different ways of regulating air pressure, et cetera. Our ears can't fully understand what it feels like to know that. And so they were kind of like, okay, we need to kind of come up with our own rubric of sound. And so the video game has this like rubric of sound that Jackie came up with. And then it has this like absurd whale filter that I kind of put together. And so putting those 2 things together, we then proceeded to try and make this kind of take on a first-person shooter, but it's a first-person hunter. And so what you're doing is the way that Cuvier's beaked whales hunt, which is kind of unique in the whaling family, is they will work together to harmonize their voices and then make it so that they're kind of throwing their voices across the ocean. So if you're a squid being hunted by these whales, at some point you just have no idea where to go. You like don't know if there's a whale in front of you or behind you, et cetera, and you get so confused that the whale gets to eat you. And so this kind of harmonization allows for them to become like one being, and that sort of oneness then allows them to eat. And I was just like, well, that's gorgeous. That is just an amazing way to do business. And so, of course, I then was like, okay, well, we have to make that. And so that's what the game is. The game is you're hunting for a squid, trying to sync up with your partner whale, going the same speed, and then sonically the sound kind of puts it together, and then you can catch a squid or not. And that's the game.
So you're the whale and you're, so the little figure that we saw in the previous slide is a squid.
Is your partner whale. So you're like kind of, it's like one side you see one, and then to your right or to your left is your partner.
Should we play a little bit of the video game?
Yeah, we can play it, but it's like I realized that the video I have of it is not, it's not the best because it was just me playing, and so you can't really see the partner.
But the
you can see
sound is the sound,
Yeah,
right?
you can see Jackie, you can hear Jackie's sound, which is great.
Yeah. I love the sound. Let's do that. That's amazing that you can do that. Wow, you're converting me to this
It's
life.
pretty crazy what's possible.
But I think that's why it freaks me out.
Definitely. I mean, I think this is on my mind right now about sort of like how to go about writing anymore, because I'm very interested in writing stuff. And actually Diana Hamilton and I are working on a sci-fi novel. We work on it for like 2 years now, weirdly enough. And so that's like a totally different type of writing for me. But I've been thinking a lot about how I wonder if at some point I could pull what Yacht's doing right now, which is like give a computer my entire oeuvre of writing and then just have it do it, and wonder if that might be better than me writing, and sort of what's so unique about this sort of singularity of a person. Like start asking and wondering how I can subvert myself. I don't know.
Yeah, but then again, yeah, let's watch this first. So what's on the left?
Oh, so the left is the map, and we put that in there as kind of like an orientation thing. But of course, because I'm so intent on having this be like true to the whale, it actually is something that whales sort of have inside of themselves. It's like a mental map they're kind of creating. It's like very loose, that like allows them to kind of see the entire expanse of where they're at. And so the map shows you the entirety of the cave.
So the sound right now, is it outward sound, or is this like their heartbeat and their?
It's outward sound.
It's outward sound. They're making the sound.
Yeah, it's like it's Jackie's take on the sound that they likely make. So they use like all different types of synths and sort of made a kind of convergence of what we hear the whales sound like and what the whales might sound like to themselves. But it's speculation. It's just kind of like very informed guesswork.
Yeah. Let's jump to the middle a little bit so we can just have like
yeah, I think like around 13, around there you kind of like see the squid, and that's kind of really delightful.
Oh, yeah,
also
this.
Yeah, that's the squid. Like you found the squid.
So cool.
Thanks.
I mean, yes, you were saying about, giving all your writing and but at the same time you are, I think, at least as I understand it or have read and seen, you are interested in sort of failures and glitches and almost, and I mean this makes sense to me in terms of queerness, because it's queer ways of connecting through disconnection, right? And my favorite thing, I think there's several probably NSEs where I quote this, and just the first reading that I give to my students whenever I teach a class, and it's Sarah Ahmed's Queer Phenomenology, and what she says that we have to experience disorientation in order to become oriented, and so I guess do you have this very utopian idea of where this can take us, or do you think that it'll ultimately fail? I
don't know. I think honestly, it's just a tool. And every tool depends on who is wielding it, So, I mean, I have hope, but I also think, I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about, I kind of had a mission at some point that like, if we name the reality that we want, eventually we'll put it together. And I kind of dance around this idea every now and then. And I still kind of agree with it. And I do think that if you can see it, it's much easier to understand what's possible. And that, I like that a little bit. And sometimes in seeing, we're disoriented. I like that. And so there is this kind of back and forth about like, just because we can make it, could we make it? Like, is that really real? Is it really possible? Is this really how a whale sees? Well, technically, yes, scientifically, yes, but is it actually? Well, no, but kind of. Like, this is kind of I don't know. I like that. I like this no, but kind of.
I guess what I'm always worried about is that the people that have most of the access to these tools are people like Elon Musk and and I don't know. This is my own issue I have to work through, and it's interesting because I love reading a sci-fi novel and the physicality of it, right? Yeah. And yet I will not go see a sci-fi movie in 3D. Like, it's a step too far. Like, there's something I want to maintain, like some sort of analog, I don't know if that's the correct word, but something about my experience needs to remain analog in order to process this idea of science fiction, which is interesting.
No, I think it's actually quite cool. And I do like hearing about your sort of perceived limit on where imaginative space sort of begins and ends. Because I feel like I have a kind of gluttonous sight or something. Like, if I'm in a good mood, I'll look at anything and feel totally satiated and excited. And sometimes that's a bit silly and not helpful. And there is kind of, I do think when one creates a boundary about like what they're taking in or not taking in, or what they believe, I don't know, they can hold on to or utilize for their brain, I kind of like that. I don't know. I think I also, because of my gluttonous sort of intake, I have like this odd waveriness about Elon Musk, which my partner does not tolerate. Like, he's the most evil thing ever. Like, I can't believe this. And but of course, in my own head, I'm like, well, listen, if we go to space and we get the rare earth minerals from space, like, that means we're not mining in the deep ocean. We don't know anything about the deep ocean. And she's like, we shouldn't be doing either. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of the thing, is like, actually, the whole thing is like, the arguments that Elon Musk and all these other, for lack of a better word, bros with a plan.
I was just gonna say bros.
The issue is that it's like, there's no thinking about just like, why can't we just use the things that are nearest by, the things that we've already like made, consumed, destroyed, etc. Why can't we just make that our limit?
Yeah,
I don't know.
And it just occurred to me, you are from San Francisco.
I am, and truly.
Did you grow up, like, we're the same age, so did you grow up really witnessing the sort of tech bros and their vests taking over?
Yeah, definitely. My mom's gallery was like in the city, and my dad worked in the city. And so I was kind of like, whenever they were often, I was not always in school. I was not the best student. I was a bit intense, I think, for school. And so I was often with them in the city. And yeah, it was weird. The city changed drastically very, very quickly. And it didn't feel good. It felt really crazy. And also, of course, now, since I grew up there, also have a lot of friends that are still there. And people took very divergent paths. Some now work for the Google and the Facebook and all of that. And others are very adamantly trying to fight to protect the city and Oakland and the rest of the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And that's also quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Live off the grid.
Yeah. Exactly.
I would love to, I can't believe I'm about to ask this, but I usually avoid this question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on NFTs as well.
I mean, this is another one of those, like, maybe I'm too gluttonous, but I think there is a possibility that NFTs could offer us economic power that could be kind of cool. I disagree, of course, with the obvious environmental issues, but I think actually Ethereum is working those out quite quickly with the difference between proof of work and proof of stake. And so as the Ethereum blockchain kind of moves to the, I think it's proof of stake, that basically means that it takes one computer to verify a transaction. Not such a big deal environmentally. If that's the main blockchain that we're using with NFTs, okay, now we're getting somewhere. But I think like a lot of my sort of ultimate interest, like if someone was like, okay, Ryn, you did it. Like you're a wealthy, famous artist, you got tons of cash, where are you putting your money? And I feel like the number one thing that I'm interested in doing is trying to get as much money and like into purchasing land to then get that land back into the hands of the various indigenous people whose land that really is. Because I do, if I understand correctly, think that it might just be best to leave the stewardship of the land to the people that understand the history of the land best, especially in the United States. And what that could mean, honestly, is that we could literally transfer all of this power from having land belong to like random people or large like random conglomerates of landowners to like belonging to the various tribes whose land it once was, and allow them to sort of make up their mind about how this land should be treated. And then we can follow their lead about what to do next. And so if in a hypothetical situation, we had a lot of the money that's going into NFTs, if all of that money that's coming then out of NFTs is then going to purchasing land, we could kind of rebalance the entire system, theoretically. It's a long thing to do. It's a long ask. But for example, like it doesn't, if you add up all of the real estate that's for sale in like, for example, Hawaii, you add that up, it's under $1 billion. Like, okay, so you're telling me for $700 million, I could buy everything that's on sale in Hawaii right now. And then I could then give that back to the people of Hawaii. And then they could just do what they will with it. That would be the craziest change of power ever. That'd be kind of cool. Then again, Andrew Carnegie was about to straight up buy the Philippines to give it back to people that are Filipino. What would that be? What would have happened then? We don't know. But there was already a lot of people who were like against it, who were Filipino, who were just like, wait a minute, why are we even participating in your system? Why do we have to be bought and sold again? And that kind of question also then complicates everything. But I guess all this to say, I think inside of NFTs is the possibility to move around a lot of money. And moving around a lot of money does often create crazy amounts of change. And whether that change is good or bad is up to who's moving the money around. And I guess I wonder if it's possible to be the person who's moving the money around. Maybe the better questions can be asked, but who knows?
Wow, you've given me a new perspective on this. I tend to be so grumpy, yet here you are giving us all hope. That's really interesting. I'm gonna think about that. Ryn, I think we're nearing an hour, but now that we're looking at this slide, I did want to ask you about color as well.
Oh yeah.
And how you sort of, because do you make a sketch? You make a sketch for these, right? And so is the color in the sketch, and how do you?
I wish I had the initial sketch like handy for this, because the initial sketch was like so boring compared to this. It was like kind of like orangey and red, and it was like great. And then my glassmaker Michael was just like, he was like, dude, this is a Yakagani project, and Yakagani makes all of this reproduction Tiffany's glass. And this glass is opalescent. So in some lights, it has these like sheens that we're seeing here, and has these blues and other possibilities. And then suddenly there's reds. I mean, the piece is like, if you sit in a room with it for 3 hours, watching the natural light go across it, it's like 190 different colors. Yet it's only 2 different types of glass, really. It's just those 2 side by side. And I don't know, I think I love the queerness of color in glass. Like, not only is it like straight up a queer material, it is like literally still in motion, but it is stable at the same time. But also it is like, it allows light to put on this show that it's always putting on, but we get to see it. Like, we see it clad in all of these different possibilities. So yeah, so I don't know. I think the colors of this work we're meant to talk about what it might feel like to have your eardrums explode, like the whale's eardrums exploded in the beaching. But it's become this whole other thing about this kind of like back and forth of color and light and understanding and protection and inside and outside and opening and food and mouths and all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And the experience of the work is different depending on where you are, and the same with the leather pieces, I guess, you know, because Berlin is an entirely different gloomy light than in LA or totally. Beautiful. Rin, thank you so much. You. This was such a pleasure. I learned so much, not only about whales, but about many other things, and I took some notes that I'm gonna go back to. I think that we can open it up to questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much for that amazing conversation, Rindon and Ksenia. That was really wonderful. We do have a few questions. So the first is going to be from our friend GE. GE, I'm going to ask you to unmute here.
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you, Rindon and Ksenia. Question is, as bearing witness, because this seems all about bearing witness, which is what we should be probably doing anyway. I mean, as bearing witness means exposing ourselves to the suffering of the world in all its forms out of compassion. Can you talk about how your words, your art, and even the game components that you're creating address these poisons of greed and hate and delusion in such a deepening and interspecies kind of empathy?
I think, I don't know, I guess this is an anecdote that I can use to maybe that kind of started to really mess with me. Was I did this thing where, like, in 2015, so I was pretty young at the time, I just stopped eating octopus. I couldn't do it. I had found out that octopus were incredibly intelligent, that they were basically our intellectual equals, etc. And I was like, I just stopped eating octopus. And my friend was at the dinner table with me, and they were like, dude, who's to say that the octopus is so smart? Like, how dare you? How dare you overlay that? And I just was like, man, I better eat my hat. I'm wrong. And I proceeded then to think about like that leveling off of everything, kind of being like, there is no hierarchy here, actually, because there's no way that I could say I'm smarter than a cow or a lamb or anything, really. And so to, on principle, choose one over the other is not cool. And this kind of like lacking of privileging, I guess, has been kind of guiding my practice ever since.
Oh, I get it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, GE, for that question. Rin, the next question is going to come from me, and you started to touch on it at the end of your conversation with Ksenia, so I'm hoping you can expand on it a little bit more. I'm hoping if you can talk about glass as a medium that's transparent, as, you know, a temporal medium, a medium that's really place specific, that kind of like is impacted by light, by where it is, by where it stands, and then also how the word transparency relates to your own practice as an artist.
Yeah. Well, I had that whole spiral about the word trans, and I'm actually still kind of in it. But of course, when I did my SculptureCenter show, I had this sculpture that was like, it's the Trans-America building, I'm trans, it's mine, and kind of holding on to the things that have the same name as me. And I think glass too has some of that in it, where it's like, it's transparent, I'm trans, I'm also a parent, it's me. And sort of like, you know, in those desperate moments of trying to find oneself, you'll hold on to anything that shares your name. And I kind of still do that all the time. So there's that side of it. And then of course there's the fact that, like, I don't think any of the work that I make will be the same when you see it again. Literally the work will change, and then of course you will change. And glass is fits that description perfectly. And so do actually all of the like game-based works, because it's like, as computer technology gets stronger and stronger, literally the things that we're programming will be able to be better, like more visually clear in a stronger computer. And that kind of idea of like, oh, the clarity gets stronger as time goes on. I don't know. I kind of like that language. I kind of find that interesting. Like eventually it's so clear we can't see, which is also
amazing. Thank you so much for that answer. And the last question is from my colleague, Carolyn.
Hi, Ryn. Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about everything you just said and like this move from leather, I mean, like weather interacting with the leather and it's like opacity, but it's still like you make it this kind of porous material. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about the move from like the hides to the glass. And I guess I'm also really thinking like about the end of your conversation with Ksenia and about, I think Fia Backstrom gave me this, but like thinking about what's transformative versus what's diagnostic and how you're, I mean, here we go, trans again, but like you are like really taking every single material in front of you and using it to transform something, you know, rather than maybe me like Ksenia, I'm more grumpy and I would kind of use it to diagnose like a problem. So maybe part two is if you can speak to that at all, but I'm also interested in this like porosity and opacity move from your earlier work to this.
Yeah, I guess maybe it doesn't feel like I'm moving that far because nothing ever goes away. I'm just kind of like, it feels like that video game Katamari where everything just like globs onto itself. So in that way, it felt like when I deal with the cows, sometimes I get nervous that it's kind of intense, a bit much, you know, bodies all the time. And I guess when I think about glass and I think sort of about what it means to try and look at something or look through something, like there's always a lens. And I like that glass can kind of always, like, you know, you're aware of the lens when you're dealing with glass. And the cow kind of was one of my initial impulses to try and think about, okay, well, what lens am I looking through and what am I privileging here? And kind of like, if you know it's skin, you kind of can't unsee that in a way. And glass, you can kind of see that it was there, but you can also unsee that it was there. And I think that maybe is an interesting divergence somehow between the two. Yeah, hard to say, to be honest, but they're connected in their own way.
I have to say, this is a very Ksenia comment, but both with glass and with leather, I mean, they are queer materials also in terms of sex toys.
Yeah, I mean, and here we are.
On that note.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the thoughtful questions, Ksenia. It was awesome to talk to you.
Me too. I don't know who else I would want to talk to, just having gotten off a flight that was delayed, and my ears are still as interesting in terms of hearing. My ears are like a little clogged, but I'm energized.
Awesome. Hey, thanks. Well, I hope you have good days.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Thank you so much. You know, at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our events with a poetry reading. So we're now going to transition over to poetry. And Ryn, I know you have something you want to read today.
Yeah, I'm gonna read this thing. It's just a poem I like. I don't know. I like it because it sticks in your brain. This last bit of it. It's on the subway as well. That's when I first read it. It's by W.S. Merwin. It's called Remembering Summer. Being too warm, the old lady said to me, is better than being too cold. I think now in between is the best because you never give it a thought, but it goes by too fast. I remember the winter, how cold it got. I could never get warm wherever I was, but I don't remember the summer heat like that. Only the long days, the breathing of the trees, the evenings with the hens still talking in the lane, and the light getting longer in the valley. The sound of a bell from down there somewhere. I can sit here now, still listening to it.
That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you again for this amazing conversation. And we'd also like to thank Francois Ghibli for helping make today's event possible and sending through images of the show. We encourage everyone here today to go see the show in New York. And we'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation who sponsor this program and make daily conversations like this one possible, and for their support of our archive. You can view today's event and our full archive on our YouTube channel. For 22 years, The Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support us as well. And you can join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. if you're available for Sex Is Not the End, a Rail reading curated by Claire Donato. And before you go, please turn on your microphone to say hello and goodbye to us as you leave. Thanks again. Thank you so much, Rin.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
So
you.
happy.
For your work.
Thank you
Can't
very
wait to
much.
see the show. Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Rail fam.